My name is Maciej. I'm a PhD student from King's College London. And today I will talk a little bit about the computational cardiac anatomy in the context of the digital twin. And so in clinical practice, it's not always obvious how to compare different heart anatomies based on just images and the measurements. And for example, the end diastolic and systolic volumes may inform about the adaptive or maladaptive anatomical remodeling caused by either development or the disease. And other measurements can describe many anatomical features. However, they may miss the potential diagnostic and prognostic value of the three-dimensional morphology. And in this presentation, I will propose a transition from only those simple indices to a comprehensive description of the cardiac anatomy. And this type of analysis can be built based on the concept of the digital twin. And so with the digital twin, we want to go beyond the standard measurements and use computers for reasoning and the hypothesis generation. And the increasing availability of the clinical data from different sources and different modalities can be used within this concept. And I will present two projects that are related to that. And so the first one is about the risk stratification based on the morphological remodeling, and specifically the shape features that are related to the obesity among children. And in this project, we hypothesized that the heart will adapt to the obesity through some morphological remodeling, also at a young age. And we used the body mass index, or the BMI, as a marker for the obesity. And we thought that through statistical shape models, we would be able to distinguish the patterns of remodeling from other biometrics, such as sex and age. And we also wanted to provide some mechanistic explanation for the occurring changes. And for that, we used the data gathered through the Generation R study at the university in Rotterdam, and consisted of over 2,600 cases with no known cardiac disease. And from these cases, the cardiac magnetic resonance images were taken at short axis at the end diastole. And then those images were segmented to provide a baseline for the statistical shape analysis, which is performed in 4 steps. And before I get to that, this is sort of the shape model, or the mesh that I'll be using for visualization of our results, and represents a single left ventricle seen from 4 different angles. And the small red ball is situated in the middle of the septum, or it points towards the center of mass of the blood pool of the right ventricle. All right, so to build the statistical model of the anatomy, we first have to capture the anatomy that's available through the images. And to do that, the left and right ventricle are segmented from apex to base in the short axis images. And then the common template is aligned and tailored to those segmentations. And then with this, each mesh is going to have the same topology. It's going to occupy the same 3-dimensional space, and each anatomical point of the left ventricle will have the same mesh node identifier. And the orientation of the left ventricle is established with the center point of the blood pool of the right ventricle for each case. And the next step is building the principal component analysis to reduce the number of variables and to analyze the set of modes of the anatomical variation over the average mesh. And the PCA in explicit, it finds those perpendicular directions of the highest anatomical variance in this feature space. And in the third step, we compute the coefficients for each anatomy using those anatomical modes. And with this, every shape in the population can be defined as the average shape plus some variation, personalized variation of those anatomical modes. And finally, it's possible to compare those PCA coefficients, and with methods like the linear discriminant analysis or the logistic regression, we can find the modes that are relevant for certain diseases, or as in our case, the parameter, which was the BMI. And using those methods, the PCA and some post-hoc analysis, we revealed 3 modes that were specifically related to the increased obesity among children. And these modes were the apical conicity, the tilting of the left ventricle in the axis that's parallel to the septum, and also the antero-inferoseptal convexity, also coupled with the elliptical or more spherical cross-section of the ventricle. And then the linear combination of those modes showed that the LV of children with the higher BMI will tend towards more round shape, a spherical shape with increased volume, especially in the apical regions. And so our interpretation was that the heart adapts to the increased BMI by becoming wider in the bottom half and reducing the conicity of the ventricle. And also that the apex serve as sort of a reserve of the left ventricle when it has to cope with the increased demand caused by the increase of the BMI. And also we noticed that this healthy elliptical cone is remodeling towards a more spherical and round shape, which is also associated with some maladaptive remodeling in adult populations. And it's related to some adverse outcomes and also the obesity among the adults. So this summarizes our findings in this project. And by playing further with these concepts, we are currently trying to find patterns of cardiac remodeling throughout the person's life and try to find some deviations from the natural healthy development of the heart. And with this, we want to make this step further towards the usage of computational cardiac shape when building the digital twin. Before I move to the second project, are there any questions or maybe thoughts about the interpretations?
Audience, engage. If not, we can continue and keep those questions for later on. Thank you.
All right. So the other project is more related to the disease progression, and it tries to build the connection between some specific shape features and the cardiac function. And in this case, we try to improve the detection of the basal septal hypertrophy or septal bulge in patients with hypertension. And so this basal septal hypertrophy may occur in some patients with hypertension, and it is usually diagnosed with the visual assessment performed by the clinicians, looking at the echocardiography images, or the wall thickness ratio, where the wall thickness is measured at the base and left ventricular septum. And then the ratio is calculated. And the BSH may affect from 15 to 20% of the hypertensive cases, hypertensive patients at different stages of the disease. And the problem with this diagnostic tool is that the multiple publications suggest different thresholds for actually diagnosing the basal septal hypertrophy, and the wall thickness ratio may vary from 1.3 to 1.6, which is actually a big gap. And this can, in effect, lead to some not reproducible studies and incorrect risk stratification for those patients. And so we wanted to use a different metric than the thickness ratio that would try to capture the BSH. And we thought that perhaps we could try to objectively measure this visual assessment performed by clinicians when they look at the profile of the left ventricle and they see this sudden sharp change in the ventricle. And so we did that using the curvature metric. And the curvature, you can understand the curvature as the inverse of the radius of the circle that's adjacent to the contour or to a point at the contour. And so the smaller the circle, the larger the curvature at this given point. And we could actually fairly easily acquire this data from the already existing clinical tools, which are used to measure the two-dimensional strain. And so from that, we extracted the endocardial contour, and with some processing, smoothing, and the curvature calculation, we could calculate the curvature for each point at this endocardial contour. And although we were able to calculate it for the full cardiac cycle, we decided to focus only on the end diastole to find a true remodeling shape feature. And also we took just the basal and middle parts of the septum and aggregated it to an curvature index, which we named average septal curvature. And then we compared this index to the already existing markers of the BSH based on a cohort of 160 hypertensive patients and also 60 healthy controls. And the wall thickness was actually measured in both the four-chamber view and the parasternal long axis view for our comparison. And we found that our marker is actually not correlated to any traditional anatomical markers of the anatomy, such as mass and volume of the left ventricle and volume of the left atrium as well. However, it has the strongest correlation with almost all of the functional parameters that are related to the BSH. And in two cases, it was proven that it's the only significantly correlated parameter. And so, in a way, no matter which thickness ratio threshold we would choose for the diagnosis of the basal septal hypertrophy, the curvature should always be more accurate in describing the deterioration of the function. Also wanted to check the reproducibility of this index, and this was based on the 20 cases, including 10 hypertensive patients and 2 patients with basal septal hypertrophy diagnosed. And that was actually the most surprising result for us, because whereas curvature could actually quite accurately or could repeatedly show the cases that have the basal septal hypertrophy with the most concave curvature. The wall thickness ratio was not that successful, and depending on which observer would perform the measurements, the number of the BSH patients could be diagnosed or not diagnosed with the BSH, and also the number of patients that could be diagnosed with BSH out on this threshold for the wall thickness ratio. So in summary, we try to create a new marker that brings a new perspective to the diagnosis of the BSH, and it's complementary to the already existing measurements. And we also try to capture this visual assessment performed by clinicians in a more objective way. And so in summary of my presentation, I tried to describe the computational cardiac anatomy as a useful tool for capturing what you cannot necessarily see in the images directly, but you can use this concept to kind of generate the hypothesis and build some ideas. And using the computational methods, you can also better measure what can actually be seen in those images and come up with new ideas for improved diagnostic processes. And the computational cardiac anatomy has many more applications in both statistical and mechanistic methods that my colleagues will present during their talks. So, but for now, thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions and discuss any interpretations.
Thank you very much, Maciej. Lovely talk. Audience, comments, questions, curiosities. Yes, Ping Blue. Can you unmute your microphone, Ping?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, very nice presentation. And you have analyzed the cardiac function based on the shape. And I have a question. Just like I saw the other people's paper, how do they analyze the function? And first, just work for the image, and they do the registration. Then they create some electrical atlas. Then the calculate the function. So I'm wondering, what's your methods? What's the difference between the others, and what kind of the advantage of your methods?
Are you talking about the shape, the statistical shape analysis?
Yes, yes. Because before you have showed us the parameters, could you please go back? Yes, and here, and you have measured some function of the string and also the volume index. And I saw recently I saw other people's paper. First do the registration, and yeah, after that they just create a mesh based on the registration. Then analyze the string and also the volume. Yeah, for that research, the mainly based on the image, just like image intensity. So they use deep learning. First do the segmentation, then they have the shape, then they do the registration.
So in this case, the volumes and all of those parameters, they were also based on the echocardiography images. And the volumes were calculated directly from these by clinicians or by clinical software. So I didn't use any models to actually calculate any of those volumes or the functional parameters. But I think it would be possible, yes.
Yeah, but when you calculate a statistic shape model, first do you need the segmentation tool to create your shape model?
Yeah, so that was in the first project that I was describing. That was related to the obesity among children, and it's not related to the hypertension that I was describing. So these were two different projects.
Okay, and also your projects and your methods only based on the shape, and you are not use any. pixel information like the intensity value?
No. So the segmentations were actually performed manually by clinicians and technicians. So I didn't use any deep learning methods for the segmentation, no.
Okay. Have you think about to combine your shape and also the information from the image?
Yes, that would be a possibility. But the thing to remember here is that the study is related to the children data, which is like super hypersensitive, and actually getting permissions for usage of this data is very difficult. But from the technical point of view, I think yeah, it would be interesting, and it would definitely be possible to combine those data sources.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for more questions, audience. Anna. Please unmute your microphone, Anna. And you can shoot your question. Microphone, you can. I can read. And I can see your hand raised, but we cannot hear you. And the system is telling that you have your microphone muted. So you either try to unmute your microphone or you try to type your question in the chat and I can read it. If we have other question from the audience, yes, I have a question now. Yes, you write your question. While Anna's writing, any other question from the audience? Jorge, please go.
Morning. Hi, Maciej. Thank you for your talk. A little bit of a technical question here. The models identify in the obesity remodeling, one of them is tilting. So my question is, how do you make sure that it's actually tilting and not a sort of MRI artifact of misalignment or so when you are only using the short axis for your model?
So yes, we had an issue with this, and it's true that sometimes there may be some basal slanting occurring because of the usage of just the short axis images. So there will be some spurious variability in there. But there are two things here. Firstly, we are using a very large data set where the spurious variability is kind of a little bit diminished when you use over 2,000 cases of the imaging data sets. And also we checked with the other modes, and we sort of tried to scatter the correlations between the different modes, and we saw that it's actually correlated between modes that's related to tilting and the mode that's related to the conicity and the convexity in the septum, in a way that we can tell that indeed this is the mode that's related to the obesity.
Did you check some of the examples to?
Yes.
I mean, to see in long axis whether this was the theory was holding that? Yeah.
So we checked many of. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it was just out of curiosity, but. All right.
So Maciej, I can read you the question from Anna.
All right.
My question is about the computation of the concavity of the endocardium. How are you defining the length of the segment of the endocardium to compute the radius of the sphere?
So the computation, actually, I'm using the equation that's using the derivatives or the gradients in the contour. And also, when we are processing the contour, we checked empirically how many points do we need to achieve a high quality and robust numbers for the curvature. And so we found that when we used 500 points to calculate the curvature for each point along the endocardial contour, it's enough to represent the curvature accurately, and it doesn't matter if we use 1,000 points or 10,000 points or even more. The number is still going to be pretty much the same, with the differences among the 1 to 10,000 or something like that.
Great. It's already 10:05, so it's the break time. We have 10 minutes. People want to break. There are 2 more questions in the pipeline. Philip.
Hey, hi, Maciej.
Hello.
I just wanted to follow up on, you said you saw the shape of the left ventricle changed in adult studies, and here we see kind of this more spherical shape in these children with elevated body mass index. So I wanted to ask, I know you don't have the data, but what's your idea? What could be the reason, or what is this adaptation due to? Based on these adult studies, what do you think? Why is the shape changing?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure. I think, like I said, I think it's because of the increased afterload in in those cases with increased BMI and those more obese adults. I think the reason is the same. That's how the heart is actually coping with this increased demand.
Yeah, I think that's in Fatima Crispy cohort with these younger children with growth restriction. They also have this spherical shaping, so it's an interesting find. I guess it might be related to different afterload changes in these children, but that's a nice thing to see here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. Jingjing.
Hey, Maciej. So maybe I have missed your explanation, but could you go back to the second project, the 2D plots?
I'll try.
Next one, please. Next slide.
Here?
Yes, this one. So this one, since see there are these 2 patients, they were like only 2, and it's quite hard to actually say there is indeed a statistical significance. So I wonder how you interpret this.
The statistical significance?
Yes, like how do you generate some conclusion from these 2?
So these are the Blunt-Altman plots, right? So they show kind of the average curvature index or average wall thickness ratio for each of these cases. Sorry, can you see my mouse?
Yes. Mouse.
Yeah, perfect. So so they show the average value of the wall thickness ratio between the 2 observers, and also the difference between those 2 observers, right? So you can see here that, well, there are always some differences between the measurements done by the observers. But in the case of curvature, you can always tell that even though there are differences, they're always going to be on this concave side of the curvature. So it's always going to show that the left ventricular septum is actually concave and there's the septal bulge. Whereas in the case of wall thickness ratio, well, the wall thicknesses can be measured differently at different points of the septum. So therefore, you can't really tell whether the patient has or doesn't have a septal bulge.
Yeah,
we didn't really use any statistical tests for that because the reason for that is actually that the units that we are using are different for the 2 methods. So here we are calculating the inverse of the radius. So it's length, it's 1 over length. And the wall thickness ratio, it has no no units. And the wall thicknesses are, of course, measured in centimeters or millimeters.
Yeah, so my question is that since there's only 2 cases, it's quite hard to convince people that there is indeed like significance. So is it possible to get more data or some data augmentation to make it more interpretable, more convincing?
I guess it would be possible if we would have clinicians who would like to measure this stuff. Yeah, it's not impossible, definitely.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well,